this is kind of an experiment for us, stepping out on a limb with, going into an area that can become unnerving for some people. And it was exciting for us to think about doing this. And a lot of why we felt that the spiritual paths that people have taken to this valley was important is because there is something that I believe sets Aspen apart from other mining towns in the sense that we didn't end up a rough and tumble wild, wild west town. We didn't end up a ghost town. We had a really strong community. And I, of course, attribute that to the women in town in the 1880s. Because in the beginning, in the first, community of people living in tents in the winter of 1880 through 81, there were 13 women here. And they were women that were schooled in, educated, finishing school education. That during the Victorian era, what was taught was that you were to maintain the moral fiber of your family. That was the woman's role. And that woman's role helped the ladies in town to establish literary societies, glee clubs, cultural things, but then also a Sabbath school. And by the spring of 1881, when the newspaper started printing, which was in April of 1881, we had the first printing of the newspaper. In that newspaper, there was a quote about those Sabbath schools that had been taking place in a tent with Mrs. Gillespie's direction, her playing her pump organ that came in a stagecoach over Taylor Pass, down from Castle Creek and into Aspen. They attributed these first religious organizations. The quote is, it has fulfilled a mission and is still doing so, and one will have a bearing upon the future of Aspen for years to come. And I do believe that it did have a bearing on how Aspen grew. In the spring of 1881, in the printing of that newspaper, they said that there had been a compact signed by 15 people here in town, 9 men and 6 women. And of these, the compact was to establish the first church here in town. And of these, 1 was a Catholic, 2 were Baptist, 3 were Presbyterian, 4 Congregationalist, and 5 Methodist. So it has always been a group of different varied backgrounds coming together to make what I think is so special about Aspen, is that it takes all the different congregations coming together and working together. And so we invited different representatives from the congregations here in town. This is Dan Bosko, and Dan is a pastor. Is that? So you guys have to excuse me. I'm a bad Christian because I don't know, and I get nervous. But so pastor at great at Crossroads Church. Then we have Jane Keener-Quiat, Reverend Jane Keener-Quiat, right? Okay. From the Aspen Community Church here, which is United Methodist, correct, by denomination. And then Judy Zanine, who is a longtime member in the fellowship of the Episcopal Church here, which is called Christ Church, correct? Okay. And it's quite confusing when you go backwards to see what the names of churches were, because there was, at one point, there was Grace Episcopal Mission, a Christ Episcopal Church, a Methodist Episcopal. I am baffled by the history of it all. So what I'd like to do is ask each of them to share a little bit about their congregation, about the journeys here, about why this is the community church, about how, the Christ Church came about again in the 1950s, the transition of Crossroads from Baptist to where it is today, and just the different stories that we have, and then we'll open the evening up to question and answer. We have a lot of historical facts up here that hopefully are true. The fun part about my research is that when you find something, you go and find 2 people that said something differently. So it's an interesting combination. And so I am thrilled that you are all here. And Judy, because you're sitting to my right, I'm going to start with you. Is that all right?
That's fine.
Okay, excellent. So, ladies and gentlemen, Judy Zanine.
Okay, thank you. I'll start here in 1886 when St. John's Episcopal Church was built by the mission of Western Colorado. At that time, Aspen was called Ute City, and it was the top of the silver boom. There were approximately 15,000 people here, and then came the crash. It dropped to 1,000, or about that many people. This affected the population of the church, and it closed soon after World War I, and that was referred to as quiet years. Now, during that time, as the quiet years, St. John Church was relocated in Marble. $2,500 was donated by the Episcopal Women's Guild. 2 lots were purchased. The chapel was dismantled, moved to marble, on the railroad car, along with the organ, and it was reassembled on its present site.
So this was the church that at one point sat on the corner of Bleecker and Second, is that right? So
No, wait a minute here. Since I wasn't here. A couple of years ago. I don't have that down here.
I had in 1893 in the business directory, we had the Episcopal Church was located on the northwest corner of Bleecker and Second.
Okay, that's probably right, yeah.
So just a few blocks.
After it was moved, the bell tower was added to the church. And a 500-pound bell was added in 1911. And the bell was donated by Mrs. Proctor of Proctor & Gamble. Mm-hmm. So we had wealthy people around back in 1886.
Oh, yeah.
Then the marble.
Talking about now, because in Marble, we're talking about
Christ
the Marble
Church.
Church.
Yeah, just how we got back where we are. The marble quarries then had a crash, just like the Silver Boom, and it closed. And in 1974, the present congregation received permission to proceed having. It's been used by Episcopal, Catholic, and Union congregational meeting places, along with other groups. So the modern times, before World War II, was when Aspen was rediscovered by pioneer skiers, mostly 10th Mountain skiers, Hollywood stars, and some Chicago business leaders. The Aspen Skiing Company, Aspen Institute, and the music festival and school were getting underway. So the town started to grow, and thanks for Peggy Rowland and Marion Lee, I heard many, many stories about a little red miner's cabin on Hopkins Street, just down from the bank. And every Saturday, they would go and build a fire in the potbelly stove, so it would be warm for a church service on Sunday. And they did that. Then the Episcopal Church was again organized in 1956. So then in 1959, Reverend Richard Palmer arrived to take responsibility of the new church that would be located on property that was given to the church by the Rowland family, and that's where the church is now, 5th and West 7th Streets.
And just so, because Peggy Rowland has a long history in Aspen, her grandfather was the pharmacist here in town for many, many years, Dr. Al Lamb. And his home is on the corner of 2nd and Lake.
Yeah.
It was sometimes called the Schilling House, but it was Al Lamb's home for a long time. So Peggy grew up here in Aspen, am I right, David? I'm getting nods from David, so I make sure. And so her history here extends back to, turn of the century.
Okay, so the new Episcopal Church opened here as Christ Church, August 1st. And Francis Stanton, the Chicago architect, was the one who designed it. And some things haven't changed. I have this article from the Aspen Times, and it says, to those of us who have observed with interest comments by local residents about the proposed 5-story hotel, and the new Aspen Bank this year, and the projected 4-story Main Street motel last year, absence of any expression about the new Episcopal Church bears out a fact that few will dispute. Churches enjoy an immunity from criticism not granted to other public or private institutes. Well, there was so much controversy over now.
Design?
Yes. We were living in Palisade before we moved up here, and so as when I learned we were coming to Aspen, I talked to the priest and Episcopal priest in Grand Junction. Is there an Episcopal church in Aspen? And he kind of chuckled. He said, yes, it looks like a pregnant oyster. Now, I think I would have maybe thought it was a covered wagon or a Watson hut, but that was his description of it. So, I mean, the adjacent property owners were just really up in arms. Evidently, they removed a lot of trees, especially at the back and the alleyway, so that the music festival had to look at this back of this ugly building. I mean, they were very unhappy with the fact that that was there. But Stanton also designed a house on Red Mountain that had the same architecture that his brother did.
Yeah.
So, I don't know when this was written in 1962.
All right.
So things haven't changed. There's always some controversy. So then we've just had lots of different ministers. Our newest priest is born and raised in England, Father Grice, and he felt he didn't know enough background on the church here so they asked me to fill his place, so I'm trying. And that's about all I have to say. The church I will mention, the church was remodeled, as I'm sure everybody knows. It started in 2008 and ended in 2010. And let's see here, the new church, besides what this article said, our new church received 3 Colorado Regional Architectural Awards, and the 4th award, a national one, was presented to Studio B Architects. So the addition has improved it.
Would you like to do questions now, or you want to hear everyone talk and then do questions afterwards? Which would you all rather do? All right, why don't we let Jane, if you want to share with us, because I know you've done a lot of research, especially about the history of this building. You know, we have this building and St. Mary's are the 2 churches, the 2 buildings that stand from the 1890s, really, 1880s with St. Mary's and 1890 for this church. So,
could I first interject? I forgot to mention, as we were going through our remodel, the community church was very generous and let our congregation have services. And it worked out wonderful for us, and I hope it did.
We had a good time.
It
I
was.
mean, one service, and then you get ready for the next one, and the next one, you do that all the time. But we had a great time.
Yeah, it was a wonderful procedure that helped us out.
Yeah. Well, this church was built in 1890, but that Presbyterian church was actually organized, around 1886. And, it was planned, and the money was raised for it. It cost $20,000, and it had 18 electric lights, so it was the top of technology. And Aspen had one of the first electrical grids, I understand.
we were definitely leaders in that technology. Hydroelectricity, actually, is what we were doing here.
Okay. But the Methodist had started a church in 1884, and they were over on Hopkins Street at the corner of Hopkins and Aspen. Well, it looked like a pretty large church and a parsonage next to it. We had said that before the silver crash, many churches were flourishing here. And then during the quiet years, they closed. And come around, the Methodist church then was built, a few blocks over and functioned. And then in around 1920, there were, among the Protestant churches, there was just the Presbyterian and the Methodist. And they had many, many talks and decided to come together. I read their Sunday school classes met together, the first day on a certain Sunday. So they came together like that. The other Methodist church was used for other things. I think it was used for another church. I think it said the colored people, excuse me, but that's what it said, met in that church afterwards. It was also used for social events and a gymnasium. But when they joined with the Presbyterians, they used the Methodist parsonage and the Presbyterians church. So it came together as the community church. Interestingly enough, talking about community, when the group came together and formed as the community church, what we call an administrative council, you call a vestry, I'm not sure what you call it, but your leadership group, was made up of 3 Presbyterians, 3 Methodists, and 3 people from the community. And isn't that interesting? That the community church actually had its governance reached into the community for governance from the very beginning. And I didn't know that until today. I believe the bell came from the other church. It was, I don't remember where it came from, but it's a very old bell, and I believe it was brought over. But in 1934, the Aspen Community Church was incorporated, and in 1934, the Presbyterians moved to Loma, Colorado. We exchanged buildings. So they went to Loma, and we got this building. So it's been a Methodist church since 1934 and served by Methodist pastors. But it's been kind of a community center in many ways ever since. It's had a Jewish congregations through many of years. But I would say mostly the Protestant congregations, most of them met here or were gathered here in some way during all those years.
And today, the building itself is, what has been done to this building? And since
It's undergone
1934, I know that the stained glass in the circle
Yeah,
is
the original
1960s.
the original stained glass out there was a geometric design. So if you look at really early pictures, it's a geometric design. You can't tell much about it, but it was not a picture, with the people. This stained glass was done in honor of a child that belonged to the pastor, his name was Keith Merriman. And his daughter died of a sudden illness. She was just sick about 3 days and died. It may have been pneumonia. I'm not sure what it was, but the little child in the picture where Jesus is, with her, that's to represent Mary Kay Merriman, and that was done in honor of her. A lot of the stained glass is original or repaired. You'll see that some of it does not have quite as much design, and those were built together with other glass that was, to try to make it, sit similar. And most of the things in here are original. The pews are original. The floor may have been worked on. The stage has been made larger. It used to be open. You can see if you go down the stairs to the fellowship hall, there is a picture of a worship service that was probably in the 50s. And you can see that you can go back in here. And at one time, Elizabeth Pepka paid for the renovation, and they worked on this area here. And there was painting on the walls with some stars that I'm told is like a Buddha. Was like that. So anyway, she did that, or she paid for that. So work has been done here. The organ has been changed. This is not the same organ that was here for a long time, but the earliest organ was probably not very much. There used to be a speaker up on the wall right here for the organ. So I don't know what that sounded like, but this organ came from Massachusetts, I believe. But let's see, we are now undergoing hope to undergo a complete restoration. this building within the next few years. And that's why we're trying to raise almost $5 million to do that. The balcony is sagging just a little bit. I can't remember the dimensions of it, but right now we're not supposed to use it. I read that this downstairs is supposed to be able to seat 350 people and another 150 up there. I did not realize, I thought it was 350 in all.
Wow.
But we hope to. Well, we love to fill it up. We love to fill it up. When it was built and dedicated, and a cornerstone was put in on that corner, you'll see a white stone. It says First Presbyterian Church. In some of the historical documents, it says that what they put into a sealed container was a Bible, a list of the members of the church and the leaders, some city papers, like maybe something about the city council. They also list a Chicago interior, or maybe Chicago interiors, and I'm out after that right now trying to figure out what that was. Maybe it was a magazine?
Well, the design style is the Richardson Romanesque, Richardson being the Chicago architect who built a lot of the buildings in Chicago after the fires in the 1870s.
So I'm looking for information. The architect was Frederick Hale, and he actually lived, I believe, in Utah then, but he was from the East. And let's see, a list of the workers that were building the building.
Interesting.
So I'd love to get into that sometime. I don't know if you could get into cornerstones.
Right. Well, I think it was typical, because were we just reading something, or we just shared something at the Historical Society about stuff being put in a cornerstone of another building that we would love to have seen, but I don't know where that cornerstone is. So I think it was typical of the day to put a time capsule, if you would, of information in a cornerstone. So Dan, you're up.
I'm up. Well, this is great. It's a privilege to kind of share a bit about certainly Crossroads and our history. It doesn't go back quite as far as you, especially. Well, no, yours is older. You said, yeah, we go back to 1950s. But there was, as you read, Nina, there was evidently various people from different backgrounds, Baptists, and they said there was a list of 2 Baptists, blah, blah, blah. And I love the line I read in there, I pointed out to Nina about that I guess they would have pastors come over from Leadville to pastor during the late 1800s. And it said evidently they didn't come often because there wasn't a whole lot of money. And they didn't feel like dealing with the unruly flock, as it's in Aspen.
The pulpit was often unoccupied, as finances were low and men willing to shepherd the somewhat unruly flock were hard to find.
Yeah.
Is that from the ancient times?
You know what? But this piece that I have here actually is a manuscript that was written by someone in 1934 that we have in our archives in the Aspen Historical Society that they did research from and wrote, going through all the old newspapers and such and put together these facts into one thing about the history of the churches in Aspen, actually.
I would love to know about that flock.
Yeah.
Or not. Yeah. But so evidently there were some Baptist roots here. But from our history, which is compiled by this man named Holly Holloway. I don't know who may know Holly, but yeah, Don certainly does. And Holly and Irene are still members of our church. They've been there since the beginning. And he's, I believe, 97 now. And she's 95. They just celebrated their 70th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
Yeah, just an amazing couple. So they're fun to talk to. But so he had compiled some of this some years ago. So I'm taking some of his notes because, like somebody said, "Oh, your pastor said he hadn't been around all that long. I've been here about 8 years." But in the 50s, there's a group started to form the idea of church around the desire to read, study, and teach the Bible in Aspen. Obviously, I'm sure some of that was going on, but there's a group that wanted to assemble and do that. A couple by the name of Verlin and Ruth Ringel. I don't know if that rings Mills for anybody?
He was on the corner of the Aspen Times.
Oh,
Sold
okay,
the Aspen Times to build Dunaway.
okay,
He had a Bible study in his home.
okay. Yeah, the Ringwells were the ringleader, so to speak, of this crew. And three other couples. And they called someone, I think he was from Grand Junction, George Dillner, was the first pastor, and then a local rancher by the name of Dan Rowley. And in 1957, the church was chartered. And actually, the mayor, A.E. Robinson, does that ring any bells? A.E. Robinson welcomed the First Baptist Church into the community. So that was kind of their start. Some names, I don't know, I just thought I'd write these down, but certainly Verlin and Ruth Ringel, and their son Judy and son Dan, and Bleska Broughton. Broughton, and who had children, Ken Jr. and Jackie Broughton. Mrs. Briggs, Sharon Briggs, I met Sharon Briggs. She was a member of our church. Some of you may know Sharon, who's since passed away, but wonderful blessing for us. Joey Briggs, Mrs. Miller, the owner of the Hillside Lodge in East Aspen, Johnny and Nadine Johnson, Miss Pearl Maltzberger, who they called Aunt Pearl. Love that. Just enough to start a church. Church was meeting in the Isis Theater. They started off in the Isis Theater having some meetings, and they called another pastor in 1959, a retired Brooklyn cop. And they started holding services at the Shenick. The Shenick family, does that ring a bell? Northwest Shenick, S-C-H-E-N-I-C-K. Shenick? Maybe either way, at the northwest corner of 3rd and Bleecker, which is somewhere near a location you mentioned in one of those articles, which I thought was interesting because an old Baptist church from the he said 1800s was
Second and Bleecker, I thought.
Well, that was one of them, but there was, Second and Bleecker was the,
northwest corner of 3rd and Bleecker, supposedly. He could have been off
yeah, Third
a
and
block.
Hopkins. That was Baptist. Baptist Church was on 3rd and Hopkins in
That's where Maggie Wolf
1893.
is, isn't it?
Yeah, interesting.
Other side of
Second
it.
and Bleecker, yeah.
So evidently, when we were disconnected from that, there was not a complete line going back to that. But services, Verlin and Ruth Ringel rented their house, 217 East Hopkins, for a while. And then 2 vacant lots were purchased in the West End, which is now our current location, for $3,000 a lot. Slightly less than prices today. I had some various pastors came along. The church was completed in 1963, and what was completed first was the basement. If I understand this right, Don, if you have anything to chime in on, Don's been a part of church for a long time now, down in the Basalt area, but chime in. But I believe they met in the basement. They just built the foundation of the basement of the current sanctuary and met down there. They put a floor on it. And then they built the rafters, they brought the rafters in, these 6 big glue beams. Is that what they call them?
Blue lamps.
Glue lamps, thank you. In from Grand Junction or somewhere that they built and started building the structure. And they added on a parsonage, which then became offices, and some of you may know we're going through a remodel now. But various pastors came along. The church was completed in 63. Lyle and Eva Abbott, Don Sills, Greg and Sally Livingston. It was real interesting. Greg came back in 1974 to pastor, and he was one of the first folks who came to the Isis Theater when they first started meeting in the 50s, and that's when he had his big conversion to Christianity back in the 1950s. And now, you may know Greg, he heads up a whole wonderful, wonderful ministry in the middle, over towards the Middle East, over that way. So really doing some amazing things. He and his wife, and Ken and Dorothy Beckadal, and Randy and Tanya. Then in 2000, and those came all through the 70s, 2000, a couple of named Steve and Michelle Woodrow came to Crossroads. And at that point, let me mention, there was a couple assistant pastors in there too. Terry and Carol Maynard were assistant pastors to Mike and Jody Nelson. And Terry now pastors the church that Don's part of. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Don and Linda are part of, down in
Grace.
which is Grace Church in Basalt. So it's interesting to just see the how all this just plays out over time. But Steve and Michelle came in 2000, and it was at that point one pastor and an office assistant, and Steve and Michelle came in, and there were evidently very few kids in the church. And downstairs in this basement, that was initially the church, they went down and it was just boxes, evidently. So they cleaned everything out and had a vision for a children's program, and that couple's been there and faithfully serving now the last 12 years. And we brought on Chris Henderson and various other folks. We now have a staff of 6 people, 4 pastors and a couple office assistants, and lots of kids now. In the basement that was once full of boxes and no kids is now full of plenty of kids, and we're going through a big remodeling. And if you've been through the West End, you may have seen it. A remodel right now that we're excited about. It's going to bless us abundantly. But that's some of our history. We changed our name back in 2006 from First Baptist Church to Crossroads Church. Going back in the records, what we found is we were never really associated with any Baptist organizations. It was chartered under the Conservative Baptist Association out of Denver. But it seems like that was for name reasons and for establishing, in a sense, an organization. That we didn't have an allegiance to any particular Baptist organization, the Southern Baptist or this Baptist. So we thought, well, we're not really associated with anyone as a Baptist church. We don't really reflect some of the Baptist ideals. And so we feel like we need to find a name that best represents what we want to be around about. And for us, that was Crossroads, that we meet people at a crossroads in their life. We come alongside them when they're trying to figure out life, trying to figure out God, trying to figure out where they're going. What's this whole spiritual journey about? Who is this guy, Jesus? And that's where we want to connect with people. And so that's why we renamed it to Crossroads in 2006. And that's, of course, what we are today.
Cool. And I have to apologize. I had invited, Father Hilton was going to come from the St. Mary's Church, and then Dr. Peter Howard was supposed to come this evening, but evidently something came up that he wasn't able to come. But I can share with you what I know about the history of the Catholic Church, because it is truly, definitely one of the mainstays to Aspen's history, being probably, I would have to say it was probably the first building that was built. Not the one that you see today, but a building that was built in the middle of that block. It actually started as St. Anthony's Catholic Church. That was the first name early on. I know that, or I say that they have been serving St. Patrick's Day dinner continuously since 1881. And the church and school that were associated with St. Mary's started in around 84, 85. And the church, the school actually operated, I believe, in through, and now I'm going by my memory from what I read about their history, but in through like the 1930s or 40s. Can you help me with that, David? Was their secret? No.
Don't ask me.
But the school was operating through somewhat of the quiet years, right?
Yes.
As one of the few schools in town, and then closed the school. The rectory building, which is the one that's actually on the corner, like opposite the gas station and the courthouse, that's the oldest building on the block. The church itself was built in, I believe, like 85, 86, but I'm not exactly sure of that.
89.
89? Yeah. So what I want to know is if anybody can tell me why this church and the Catholic Church have the sanctuary on the 2nd floor.
Because the school was in the bottom at St. Mary's,
Okay.
and the church was upstairs.
And I guess that
And
has
they
to
would
be,
heat the bottom, and the heat would come upstairs to heat the church.
okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, I can't find any architectural reasoning for it, but both I found, obviously these two churches built within a year of each other have that same design style, which I found interesting. St. Mary's,
Youth fellowship and everything was in the very basement of this church.
Of this church as well.
Of this church as well. And there was schooling going on down here as well.
Also.
And the community would get together in the basement, and that wasn't big enough. This was up here, so that's, I don't know about the heating part of it, but.
Makes sense.
I read somewhere that at a time when it was too expensive to heat this area up here, the church
Met downstairs.
met downstairs, but I do know it was used for kindergarten and school.
Yeah.
NYF would meet downstairs, Methodist Youth Fellowship, all of the planning going on that, so that there was education going on down there as well.
Downstairs here.
Yeah.
And, you know, these Christian organizations also formed a women's Christian temperance union, that much I do know. There was a temperance union as early as the spring of 1881, with Mrs. Gillespie being one of the secretaries of that. I believe it was Mr. Balderston and Katie Cohenhoven, the daughter. I have some of my Mrs. Gillespie information in here. The temperance union, originally established, had a vice president. The president was Mr. G.W. Stapleton. Is that you, Stapleton?
Well, that was really the only stable.
That was the only ones, right? So that's in April of 1881, a temperance union established. Again, their mission to provide a Christian reading room for the single men who were here in town, keeping that.
Did you say G.W. Stapleton?
G.W. Stapleton is what I had.
I know a John Stapleton, but I don't know of any Georges or
Okay.
Marys.
That's why I was confused. I'll have to look into that a little more.
But that's when we came here.
Yeah, in 81.
Anyway,
Okay. By 87, you had 6 vice presidents, one from each of the 6 different Christian denominations, one woman from each one, representing the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And what they did was they got together and built the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association. And that is the Cantina building on the corner, right over here, catty corner, the Hotel Jerome on the corner of Mill and Main, the Chitwood building. And it had a gymnasium, they played basketball, they had, showers and reading material. It was all approved reading material for the single men in town, so that the brothels and saloons weren't the only answer for them, and to, again, maintain the cultural element of this community, which, we sometimes attribute only to the 1950s and later, but it truly was a big mainstay to the 1880s as well. And Jane, did you have a question?
I wondered why the Aspen Chapel wasn't here.
And the Aspen Chapel, honestly, I thought a panel of 4 was enough, and I didn't invite Greg personally, but that was by no means of an omission, because the story of how that church was built, again, as a non-denominational group and gathering of people of different spiritual journeys coming together in one area to join. And it was also has a history of the Mennonite church involved in the building of that as
I
well.
think it's important to know why the chapel was built there.
Sure.
Lyle Yost was a Mennonite, and he was very anxious for the church, the chapel to be built here, because he had traveled in Europe, and he thought so many tourists were coming here that there should be a church or a chapel where people could come in if they didn't belong to any particular denomination. And for years, the church was always left open, but the idea was that it would always be a place for people who had no particular religious affiliation in this town. They might be people from France and so forth. And I think it's important, if anyone ever comes to visit there for any ceremonies, to know that the windows are the Beatitudes. And we have a booklet that tells the story of each Beatitude and what they mean. And of course, we went along, and one of the reasons we have affiliated with the Jewish congregation is that it helps us with the cost of keeping the chapel going. Many people come and use the chapel. They can call up and say they'd like to have a baptism, a wedding, or a funeral, and you'll never see them again. And then we have a lot of people who come once a year, and I call them Christmas Christians, and then sometimes they come back on Easter. But I think it's important for people to know that it's a place to come, whether you have a religious affiliation or not. And the newest thing we have now are the bells, the Carillon bells, and we hope to play them more. We don't want to run the people that live in Meadowood out but we now play them before services and for any special occasions.
And why, Jane, is it not referred to as the Prince of Peace anymore? Or where did that name come from?
It was changed because they wanted to make it more ecumenical, especially when the Jewish people joined. They felt, however, Greg gave a sermon recently on the fact that the dove, which is what is at the top of the chapel, was a more of a religious symbol than the cross. And it was quite a good sermon. So I think people should know that. And I think that we share the parking lot with the city. The city gets the lower part, and if you'll notice as you go by, there are a lot of cars. And so people are able to park there. And I think that we do so much for the community, and we are never compensated by the city in any way, or county.
Thank you for sharing all that. There's also, you know, the story of the Christian Science Reading Room that we pass every day as we drive out of town. The little white Victorian on the corner next to the Hickory House of the S-curves. They've actually been a congregation here in Aspen since the 1950s, or have had the reading room here since the 1950s. I spoke with a friend of mine who helped with the Aspen Community Theater show, said the congregation has about 16 members here in Aspen. So it's a small fellowship, but yet has a presence here. And the reading room is open often, but there was no one there, so I was unable to find anyone to speak for us in this program. And we also reached out to the Mormon Church, the Latter-day Saints, which is opposite the high school, also been here for 50 years.
What about the Lutheran Church?
And the Lutheran Church, we reached out to them as well. Now the Lutheran Church, you know, there was a Scandinavian Lutheran Church, or Swedish Lutheran Church, as they talk in the 1880s. So that's another one of the congregations that's been around for a while. Swedish Lutheran is what they call them, and Lindholm pastor was on Main, between 2nd and 3rd Streets. It was on the south side of Main Street that I see in that big bird's eye map. I found it on the map. And there's also, when I was reading through this 1893 business listing, we had Baptist, Catholic, Christian, Episcopal, Swedish Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, and a spiritual society, which I found interesting. That was the first time I'd seen that. I found this today. That met at the POS of A Hall. And I'm not sure what that is. I didn't have time to research that one. It's got to be one of the, when you look into the secret and benevolent societies, I mean, there were so many of them. It's funny. So it had to be one of those. I mean, churches met, or congregations met in, like you said, the Isis Theater. They met at the Rink Opera House, which was one of the early opera houses here in town, long before the Wheeler Opera House was built. They met in homes. They met in the courthouse. You know, different places before the buildings were actually built. What was one other thing I wanted to share? Oh, you said something about baptism, Jane, and I just wanted to share one of the facts that was in this. Who was sharing the story about early on when there weren't any pastors in town and someone died? What was that story?
Well, yeah, the miners in 1879, they came over and they had the mining camp, and somebody died, Colonel Kirby from Texas died of brucellosis, something like that. They call it mountain fever, I believe. And they had a kind of a little brief ceremony for him in, wood that was just rough hewn. And there were 3 masons that put some little sprigs of a tree on there, and they said, goodbye to him, and said the Lord's Prayer. And so that was listed as the first time it was noticed that there was no pastor.
That it was a need of every, yeah, a necessity. The first baptism took place actually, or the first recorded baptism, was Miss Yola Bracken, and she was immersed in Hallam Lake on Sunday, August 23rd, 1885. So
At least it was summer.
yeah, right. Baptist and Lutheran were among the early ones formed here, definitely along with the Catholic and such. Now, the Jewish story, obviously, there were Jewish people here in Aspen. There were synagogues in Leadville, and we're going to explore that next week when the program is about beyond Christianity. Where we're going to talk about, we have a very strong Buddhist community here in the Roaring Fork Valley. A little bit more so down valley than up here in Aspen, but definitely with visits from the Tibetan monks yearly, and then the other spiritual journeys that people take. That, this valley, people undoubtedly say there is something significantly spiritual about this valley, whether it is whatever your belief be, and that is what we're going to explore next week. A little bit more outside the confines of church, the four walls, churches without walls, perhaps we could call it, or congregations or fellowships without walls. The Ute people, there was a Ute elder here last year who talked about, their church, the walls of their church were, the canyon walls, the mountains, this was all their sanctuary. Did you have a question?
Do you have any information on the Jehovah's Witnesses in this area?
Actually, we do. They hold their meetings on Tuesday nights, so they couldn't come. But we did reach out to them as well, and both here and in Carbondale, we tried to get someone to come and represent. But there is that church is located across from the golf course. Down, say it again. Kingdom Hall. So there is that fellowship here as well. But unfortunately, they couldn't attend that tonight either because of their meetings being on Tuesdays. So that's what little I know about them, to be honest. I know very little about the Jehovah's Witness story here in Aspen or how long they've been present here. If anybody wants to add anything or know anything, Jane?
Well, I wanted to mention the thing that I think the Episcopal Church is doing at Christmas is the basket program. I think people would like to know about that, Judy, because I think it's such a wonderful thing that you're doing and bringing all the other churches into it.
Well, this started, golly, I have to think back. I think the first time any Christmas baskets, and you want to call it that, Beverly Vance and I put together 4 or 5 big grocery bags full of food. And Schultz, who was the Health and Human Services fellow here in town, and the building out by the hospital is the Schultz.
Oh, yeah.
He came, and as he walked up the steps to the Episcopal Church and we handed him this food, he had tears in his eyes. And he just was overwhelmed that people were starting to think of those who didn't have anything. Then this started to grow to these Christmas baskets that are given out. And this is a community-wide effort. And people sign up at the Health and Human Services. They have to fill out a form of their family and how many children and what they need, so that, they are definitely needy people when they get there. And then that form is given to the Episcopal Church, but all churches help put this together. But it kind of takes place at the Episcopal Church. And last night at our annual meeting, they showed some slides. Every pew in the church was filled with these big plastic bags that, like we have a family. It was a single mom and 2 girls, 5 and 7. And they request what they would like. Well, the mother wanted pots and pans. She wanted a warm coat, hat, and mittens for her 2 daughters. No mention of a toy whatsoever. So, you know, it's up to the people who get the name. You can do, you know, you do what they want, but you could add some things. So I went to Target and bought some toys, you know. I felt so bad for these little girls. But the pews are full of these big plastic bags that they come and pick up. And I know Ann Blackwell, who's really been pushing a lot of this since she came to Aspen, met a woman in the hallway as she came and to pick up her basket, and the woman had tears in her eyes. And she said, last year I filled one of these. This year I need help. So it's really been a very satisfying thing, and you cannot believe the basement of the Episcopal Church when this is going on. I mean, there are clothes all over everywhere. There are these big plastic bags. There are people filling them, and it's next Christmas you ought to walk by. It's worth seeing.
Well, we get to work with you and the team, and we're very grateful for what you do. And I think it's real interesting because, you know, Nina mentioned when she read earlier that initially it was a group of a couple Baptist and a Catholic, and it was a very unified sense of people that had a Christian background that wanted to see Christian church represented in this town. And they really came together to do that. And it's so interesting because when there's a need, it's amazing how people group together and unify. But then things get comfortable and things go on, and often you start to see all the denominations develop and the things start to split up. And what I'm so grateful for what you do and seeing Jane open her place up for you guys to come into is that, and I hope as a pastor, you know, forgive us for the times when we have allowed divisiveness to set into the group that should best represent unity. Because that's Christianity is about Christ, who is a unifying force, right? And that was the message of Christ. And Christianity in so many ways has been the message of divisiveness. The most segregated hour of the week, as they say, is Sunday mornings. And that is a shame. But I would hope that, and I appreciate these two and some of the other churches here, that we desire to work together. We desire to set aside denominational preferences and just focus on, okay, how can we serve the community? Because that's really what Christ said, I did not come to be served, but to serve and give my life as a ransom. And that's the message of the Christian faith. So I just appreciate both of you, as well as the other churches, and for just how you open yourselves up, and having them over and through what you do with the program, to simply say, this is what we're supposed to really be about.
Well, one of the wonderful side effects is that the schools participate
Yes.
in this also. And, you know, the students are there helping to wrap the packages. And so they're learning at a younger age how to get involved and help.
And give back. And that's, you know, back to the Victorian woman etiquette. It was, you know, taking care of your family, and, you know, you maintained your appearance so that you looked good to your husband. That really was actually important. Yeah, that was part of it. But so that you could serve others. That was the part, you know, that was why you did what you did, was to be of service to others. And the mind, body, and spirit philosophy is about, you know, making yourself whole so you can serve others. So I think it's definitely part of Aspen's, you know, Aspen's story is how we all mix together in, you know, all the differences come together to make a whole that is remarkable, and it's a remarkable whole.
Well, I might add that it's, you know, it's really not just at Christmas. That's a big effort during the holiday time, but all of the churches contribute to our efforts with the Aspen Homeless Shelter. You know, there are a few of us that are on the board and work on that, but your church gives money, you know, your church gives money, and we provide for people. We try to provide for people throughout the year. The idea is don't let anybody fall through the cracks, because that's easy to happen. You know, you talk about the woman that said, I filled one of these bags last year, and this year I need help. And that happens. It especially happened since, you know, 2008, but the way the churches support, and most of our support in the shelter are from churches. And so, you know, if you're in a congregation, and it's not just the churches, it's the synagogues too. If you know, if you're a part of a congregation, and you hear a request for money to help with the homeless shelter, pay attention to that. We have the shelter in the basement of St. Mary's Church, and so they provide that space in kind giving for our space, and then we provide it for just a couple of weeks here in March, so that the St. Mary's can get ready for their St. Patrick's Day dinner, and so we have it for a couple of weeks here. But it's you know, the shelter's not year round. The shelter is from about Thanksgiving until the end of March. But then we have the day center over at Health and Human Services that is there to help people during the day with meals or computers for working on resumes or looking for jobs in case management. So we've got this going on all the time, and the churches and synagogues are very helpful.
Yes.
Bob, you have a question?
Yes, I have one question that is somewhat of a digression from the conversations you've just had. There are three major world religions, monotheistic, believing in one God, Judaism, Christianity, and the Muslim religion, which is growing exponentially. Is there any presence in Aspen here, the Valley, that,
I've been looking for
On
it.
Muslim? Is
yes,
that what you're asking? I couldn't find anybody that had any connection or knowledge of it, but
Okay.
that doesn't mean that
I'm
that's
just
true.
curious.
Yeah.
The second question, and one more. Jane, you had mentioned there's a restoration that you're planning as it relates to this particular church.
Yes, to this building.
Are you intending to restore the church, or is it infrastructural issues in terms of rebuilding the church from an infrastructural standpoint, building, or is it a contemporizing? Do you intend to contemporize this beautiful facility, this beautiful church?
We intend to shore up the structure of it.
Oh, that's
I
an
mean,
infrastructure.
it's a very solid building.
Yes.
But it's got problems up here. You see these tie rods. We were doing studies in 2009 to, Dave might correct me here, he might help with this, Dave Ellis, to find out what needs to be done, because we knew we needed to start working on this
Well, that's,
building. So
okay.
when we had, the engineers said the roof and the trusses are carrying much more of a load than they were designed to
Yeah.
carry. It could collapse, and it could collapse any time. So we moved out. The Historical Society let us meet there for 6 weeks, and we did this. But this is temporary, and we're in this building on a temporary building permit, temporary permit for occupancy. It's stable, but it's, you know.
It's beautiful.
It's not really Victorian.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are. So what we're doing is we're trying to raise the money to work on the trusses and then the roof. But there's also water damage. If you walk around the outside of it, and you look at the stone, this beautiful peach bone sandstone. There's water has come in.
Understand.
You know, you need to do tuck pointing. Well, there's been a lot of this and that with tuck pointing, but nothing that's worked very well, and that has to be done from time to time. So that all needs to be done. Some of the windows leak, some of them you can actually see through,
Right.
you know, in the cracks. So there are many more things to do. For example, here, where the water damage is. Well, there's no use in trying to fix that right now because water's still coming in.
Got it.
The balcony, as I said, is not stable. We can't use the balcony, you know, right now. So in answer to your question, we're trying to restore the historic structure. As far as contemporize, we would like to have upgraded lighting. We would like to have upgraded sound. But we're not trying to change the structure at all and don't want to. We want to restore this building
Understand.
so that it will be a historic, sacred structure for Aspen for another 100 years.
Right.
So do we have any more questions? Yes?
This might be a question more for the absent Catholics, but the monastery over in Snowmass, how were they connected? And I think they were for some time serving St. Mary's Church, or...
Well, they're Trappist monks.
Yes.
St. Benedictine's Monastery, which is out Old Snowmass way, started in, it was the 50s. It was land that was donated to, and then, it's, I've done a little bit of research on it, but not too much. The monks there are silent, I know that much. They do stuff in service to the community in the sense that they have the honeybees, and they have something else that they do in their silent retreats that are available out in that space. But the area was donated to the do you know Sigrid?
By the Pats family.
Harold Pats, he just passed on, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
And why was it given? I know it.
Well, he owned the land.
He just gave it to them
As a gift.
as a gift. And so
It
people
is
do
different.
people come here, people journey to this valley to go
Well,
to.
they lived here.
The monks did?
No,
The Paps did, right, but the monks travel here to be a part of that
They
community.
They're
Cistercians.
Cistercians.
Cistercian?
Yeah.
And isn't their Sunday service open to anyone?
Oh,
Yeah.
who wants to come?
8:15 every Sunday morning.
And they do morning stuff
They have-
throughout the week too.
And there's Gregorian Vespers at 7 o'clock every night.
And that's all.
That's open to the public.
They've made cookies, they've made eggs, they've had eggs, chicken farms out there and sold eggs. And they built the entire building by hand, all of the monks. They didn't have a contract or anything. The monks built the entire.
Without talking to each other?
They did all
That's
the work
brilliant.
by
It's
hand.
beautiful.
And they raise cattle, and they have hay. It's a farm, it's a ranch.
It's a word, right?
It's amazing for such a small area, the variety
Yeah.
of,
And the welcoming to all the different varieties, do you know what I mean? Or even, the story of making a place where everyone would feel welcome, regardless of affiliation. And I think that's the piece that makes Aspen different, special. So I want to thank you all so much for coming and having this conversation with us, and I want to thank Judy and Jane and Dan most specifically. Thank you so much. And next week we have all three rabbis, so three different Rabbi Mendel Nitz, Rabbi David Siegel, and Rabbi Itzhak Vardy. And a gentleman named Dennis Tuma is going to come talk about the Tibetan monks, and then Niemer is also going to be here to talk about, a little bit more spiritual conversation. In 2 weeks, and I sent quite a few of you, I see out here, a notice about our mountain melting pot. And that is a journey, stories, exploration that we're doing in creating exhibit pieces that will be in the Smithsonian exhibit when it comes here. We have to have a local component. And our local component is us, it's our stories. It's not just, the folks that came from Germany, to teach skiing. It's everybody's story, whether you came from St. Louis, Missouri, or wherever you came from. It's why you came, how you got here, how long you've been here, everybody's story. So it's going to be a brief talk and then actual time to do a little video story about your story, your family's story, pushpin map. We've got some other visual displays that we're trying to create to have it be a part of this exhibit. So I would invite you to come to that, and just keep an eye on us Tuesday nights. We are so grateful to be here. Thank you, Jane. We love coming here to this space, and I'll see you all next week. Thank you very much.